give you an update on what's going on at the national level in the National Quantum Initiative from my office at OSTP in the White House. This is a quote from President Biden he made at the recent signing of the CHIPS Act. We're fortunate to have a lot of support within the White House for quantum information science and technology as one of the critical and emerging technologies that we believe will lead the next decades of economic prosperity for the US. Let me just start off by saying that QUIST continues to be a national priority for the Biden-Harris administration. The NQI Act was passed at the end of 2018 and signed by the president then. This administration just put out 2 presidential directives, which I'll tell you about. And in one of them, an executive order from President Biden, it's very clear that the NQI is a sustained and substantial national priority. Our overall national level strategy comes down to 3 things. Getting the science right, where we mean understanding the applications that will benefit society, in addition to tackling the hard science and technology challenges that are impeding progress. So first and foremost, we need to get that right. Second, how do we ensure that this new field enhances U.S. competitiveness and that of our allies and friends around the world? And to do that, the questions we asked are, how do we accelerate the technology development while protecting our investment? And third, and perhaps most important, why we are all here in government, is how do we enable and benefit our people? How do we ensure that the opportunities that this field is creating, jobs, new technologies, will benefit the most amount of people in our society? And along those lines, what are the workforce development and talent pipeline issues that need to be resolved to make that happen? This is a picture from a little over a year ago where we had as many quantum companies as we could at the White House to talk about the issues facing the field with some of the senior leadership in the Executive Office of the President. This year was a big year at the policy level for quantum. President Biden signed 2 directives, an executive order and a national security memorandum specifically related to quantum computing. That doesn't happen very often. The first reformulated the National Quantum Initiative Advisory Committee as a presidential FACA, and again committed this administration to the importance of this technology. The second, is really the first high-level strategy for quantum computing coming out of the White House, and it laid out 3 broad goals. First and foremost, how do we promote this technology and ensure U.S. leadership in quantum information science and technology? So that means guide to the agencies for increased R&D investment, increased workforce development programs, and increased partnerships, not only with the public sector companies, but also with our international allies and friends. The second part was mitigating the risk. So quantum has always had this dual-use nature from its very early days. If you can build a large enough fault-tolerant quantum computer, you can crack the encryption schemes that we rely on in our academic and national security systems today. So that risk drives the need for the government to protect itself, because many government agencies have to protect information for 25, 50, even longer periods of time. So it is an existential issue, and because of the difficulty and the time it takes to move to an entirely new cryptographic system, it was felt within the White House that a presidential directive to the agencies was needed to actually give dates of when this had to happen and who was responsible for what across the interagency. And the third part is sort of the in-between. How do we protect this investment while we're deploying PQC? And how do we protect the investment while moving fast to ensure our economic prosperity as well? So these are sort of the 3 critical pillars of the quantum computing strategy, the things you really need to agree on first before you get to the more detailed strategies. In terms of congressional actions this year, the NQI Act really set up new activities within the Department of Energy, NIST, and the National Science Foundation Its companion is the so-called National Defense Authorization Act. It comes out every year and governs the DoD. This year's NDAA gave us some work to do. Within the White House, we actually have two subcommittees on quantum, which is fairly unusual. One focused on the NQI program led by DOE, NSF, and NIST, and another focused on the economic and national security implications of quantum led by DoD, NSA, and DOE again. The NDAA of this year gave some work to Essex to conduct a research and security assessment, again, very much in line with what was in the National Security Memorandum, and also to make recommendations on export controls. So we've been working on that the past year. The other big thing was the CHIPS and Science Act. The CHIPS Act was appropriated $50+ billion for advanced manufacturing of chips in the US, but a sizable portion of that, $12 billion, is assigned for R&D investments. And that includes National Semiconductor Technology Center, Advanced Packaging Institute, and other things, which can, and we hope will, include emerging technologies like quantum. The Science Act portion of that, authorized but not appropriated, includes specific call-outs for quantum. So the quantum networking program at DOE, to the tune of $100 million a year, DOE Quest program to provide user access to quantum computers, to domain experts. It called on NSF to formalize the Q12 education program and potentially gives them $8 million a year to do that. So a lot of exciting things that we're hoping will eventually be funded. If you want the latest, if you want to understand what the National Quantum Initiative Act is now, we have a updated version, because every year it gets slightly changed by Congress, amended. So you can find out on quantum.gov. Just to give you a little bit of context of how coordination and oversight works in the federal government, we have a very federal approach to science funding in the US. The National Quantum Initiative is no different. As I mentioned, we have two subcommittees in OSTP in the White House, which coordinate the activities across the 13 or more agencies who have some equities or care about quantum information science. We have my office, the National Quantum Coordination Office. It's actually quite unique. We have 5 detailees from the agencies, DoD, NSF, NIST, DOE, and NSA. These are the agencies who do the bulk of the funding in R&D and quantum in the US. So we have government quantum physicists in the White House who are helping coordinate all these activities across the agencies and engage with, the whole ecosystem in quantum, which we really consider to be not just the federal government, but industry, academia, the national labs. The NQI Act also called on an advisory committee, which I just mentioned, and it called on NIST to launch the Quantum Economic Development Consortium, which is not a government entity, but was sponsored by NIST and is now up and running and extremely successful. And we have many agencies who participate in this, initiative, from the main normal funding agencies you would think about to potential end users who are looking at this, like the Department of Homeland Security. We're looking at this technology and trying to understand, well, when is it going to matter for my mission? We put out a national strategy actually before the NQI Act was passed. It had 6 broad goals, science, workforce, infrastructure, industry, economic and national security, and international cooperation. Over the last few years, we've been augmenting that strategy. In the last year, we put out 3 new reports. One, a deep strategy for workforce development, which has led to some new programs, which I'll talk about in a second. Another that addressed the role of international talent and how important it is to the success of our scientific enterprise in the US. And the third, a quantum sensors report, bringing quantum sensors to fruition. And I just want to highlight that because we have in turn looked at all the different technologies in our strategy, networking, computing, sensing. This one is quite unique because we have multiple decades of research in quantum clocks, other sensors, and there are a lot of opportunities to bring those to market if we can push in the next few years. So this is real opportunities for biomedical imaging that agencies like NIH, ARPA-H, agencies who are fairly new to quantum technologies could really play a role, and the new NSF tip directorate and so on. So that's worth looking at. In the US, it's the agencies who implement policy, and there's been many programs over the last year. This is just a sampling. I wanted to highlight the Expand Quis program out of NSF, which really it's an experiment. It's an attempt to increase the capacity of the US to create more talent in the US. How do we go beyond the typical, top 25, top 50 schools generating quantum PhDs and expand that to many more schools? And not just PhDs, but technicians and so on. So that's a great thing that's launched, and there's many other things you can all find on our website. We do a lot of activities to engage and hear from the public, people who are participating in the quantum community. I mentioned the summits on industry. We've had several meetings this past year on workforce development. The NSF and OSTP launched the Quantum 12 Education Partnership a few years ago. The goal really here is to curate and produce curriculum for all levels, and then get quantum into people's living rooms. Make aware that there's great careers here, that the skill sets you need to be successful here will have great benefit to you in your career. Just recently in September, we had a workshop on quantum cybersecurity, trying to think about, are there research problems to protecting quantum computers that go beyond the kind of blunt instruments that we usually have to protect technology, like export controls or other things. Just last week, we had the representatives from our 13 National Quantum Initiative quantum centers around the country come to the White House to talk about how things are going, issues around workforce development, and the future. What would the next phase of the NQI look like? What are the missing pieces? And we have a advisory committee meeting scheduled for the 16th. A lot of things happened this year in international engagement. Our strategy has been to engage first with our partners who have really thought deeply about quantum, have been doing this for a while, have our core key members of the ecosystem, the supply chain for quantum information science and technology. We've now signed a number of agreements, just 4 in the last year. And we started to work multilaterally to address issues where we all have equities. How do we create more talent in STEM using quantum as a lens to accelerate it as a first step, for example? So we hosted in the White House a meeting in May. The UK hosted a follow-on meeting in November. And we've been working towards, what are the steps that we really need to take collectively? Because it's much better to be first together, than to be last apart. An example of that is the entanglement exchange. We launched this last week. The first 12 countries participating are listed there. The idea is to create a clearinghouse for talent opportunities across our countries. What are the Fulbright scholarships in all the different countries? What are the opportunities for getting visas to come and do research or postdocs or whatever in our country? So each country has their own entanglement exchange page, and to the people in that country or the people who are looking to do work go to that country, it's a resource to find opportunities. So we hope to populate this over time with all the opportunities going on in the US and working with our allies to do the same. And hopefully this will encourage companies and other nonprofits to support new programs to create more talent. How do we get people who are experts in other fields or graduating with computer science degrees to pivot and join our field, for example? How do we facilitate that? World Quantum Day is another great example where we can work together. The US took a strong step forward last year in seriously participating in World Quantum Day. This is very much a grassroots effort across the world. We created a marquee video with a lot of help from the Q2B partnership and others. Fact sheets. One thing I'll highlight is Quantime, which is a module that goes into high schools. We brought that to 300 schools across the country. We hope to expand that to 1,000 this year. APS, I didn't have a chance to update the slides, but APS, American Physical Society, just launched a branding of that, Quantum to Go, where you can sign up to help go to a school and bring quantum to kids. Give them a sense, one, that you're a person who's doing this, and they can see yourselves in you, right? Make it a personal thing, but also help the teachers who might be afraid of this new thing bring this to students. So I think this is a really huge opportunity and something we can help in the White House to scale up how we reach parents, not only students, but parents, and convince them that there are great careers here. This is a really good path for their kids. I mentioned the CHIPS and Science Act. Here specifically are the things that were in the authorization. There'd be a significant increase if these were to be appropriated. So we hope to see that happen. I'll mention also that the CHIPS Act is extremely unique, once in a maybe generation opportunity to invest in the infrastructure that can power emerging technologies like quantum. And so trying to structure that as it's implemented is a big area of our time and interest. Just looking forward, just to summarize, we have new organizations that have stood up in the US, new funding organizations, ARPA-H, the NSF Technology Directorate, the CHIPS Office. You should be engaging with these. You should think about people you can send to help you, program managers there. That's how things happen in the US government, right? Good people run programs. We have new legislation that you should be aware of and engaging on, so that we continue to get funded and NQI continues to grow. And then looking forward, the NQI is coming up on its reauthorization, its 5-year reauthorization. That is an opportunity for Congress to say, we support this, and here, let's fill in the things we got wrong at the beginning or the things that really need to be accelerated now. The bringing sensors to fruition is a great example. So we now have many examples of things in the lab that if we push on, can be fielded to mission or commercial applications. So every time you raise a TRL level, it's 10 times the cost. So you need to understand that and make a commitment. And then there's the directives that are worth looking at, because that sets the overall policy for the US. Thank you.